Happy Hanukkah.
I had a conversation recently with a woman who we got to talking, and she heard about Open Heart and started asking me about Open Heart. And I said, well, you know, Open Heart, we call ourselves a New Thought, Ancient Wisdom congregation or community. And she said, oh yeah, I know all about that, you know, New Thought stuff. I tried that. I don't do that anymore. So my question was, well, why don't you do it anymore? And she said, well, you know, because in New Thought, it seems like that everything always has to be okay. You never have room for people that struggle. It seems like everybody has to put on a happy face and pretend as if everything is all right all the time. And she said, I just can't get with that. And I said, well, it's not really like that. You know, there's acknowledgement within New Thought that people have situations and circumstances. But she said, yeah, I know that. So as I continue to think about my conversation with her, all of the things that we went through, I thought about as we were leading up to this Sunday and the fact that it's leading into Hanukkah, and you know, just like we do here at Open Heart, I started thinking, well, how can a New Thought message and Hanukkah and all of that work together? So this morning, this is what we're going to try. For those of you, when I said Happy Hanukkah to you, because we say at Open Hearts that we recognize the wisdom of all of the different faith traditions. And if you're not familiar with Hanukkah, because a lot of people think that Hanukkah is equivalent to Christmas, but it's not. It's a very different story. It's a very different emphasis. And in about the 2nd century, the people in Israel found themselves taken over by the Greeks. And the temple in Jerusalem, which was their most sacred place, the most sacred thing to them, had been also taken over by the Greeks. And the emperor at the time did the worst thing that he could do, which was he had a pig sacrificed on the altar there in the temple. And that was just, you know, total desecration of something that was sacred and something that was holy to the people of Israel. And so he did that, and there was a group, a small set of band of Jews that were called the Maccabees. And the Maccabees were fierce fighters, and they, even though they were outnumbered, they were able to take back over control of the temple. And when they got there in the temple, they were waiting on their reinforcements and all of that. So they decided that they would stay there. They would take the menorah, they would take the light that was in there, the lamp that was in there, and light the lamp in order to have light, but more importantly, to remind them of really who they were, remind them of God's presence. And when they got the oil, they discovered that what really was only about enough oil there to last one day, but it was really going to take them about 8 days before their supply could be replenished. And so as they were there in the temple, they began praying and began seeing a different result, a different outcome, and what some people might call a miracle. What ultimately happened was that the oil that should have lasted for one day ended up lasting 8 days. And so that's why when you see the menorah and you see that it has a place for 8 candles, each one of those candles symbolizing one of the 8 days. And so as I thought about all of that, I began thinking, well, part of what I think the message that we can take away for us with regard to Hanukkah in Open Heart is the recognition and the realization that our sacred place and our sacred center inside can be encroached upon by worry, by stress, by the weight of the worries of the world. All of those things oftentimes will encroach our sacred space. I mean, I know we say our affirmations, we do our affirmative prayers, we have all of that, which is very powerful and very, very much necessary for us. But there are those days And the message of Hanukkah, I think, tells us is that even in the midst of desolation, even desecration, even in the midst of despair and not having all the hope that we can have, that ultimately there is something there that we can draw upon. And no matter what has happened in the past, we have the ability to start over again, to start something new. One of the things that we affirm always, and it comes from Thomas Troward and Ernest Holmes picking up, is the fact that principle is not bound by precedent. Meaning that whatever might have happened in the past does not have to control what happens in the present moment nor in the future. Meaning that just as something might have gone wrong yesterday, today is a brand new opportunity, and today is an opportunity to employ the principle to make it the day in which we want.
Teach.
You might have tried something and it didn't go right. You might have felt not your best yesterday, but today's a new day. And I remember I used to love to say to people that each day is a day filled with promise, potential, and possibility, and yes it is. And what we can learn from this, when we look at what happened at Hanukkah, is that the people who were there, although they saw their most sacred symbol desecrated in the way that it was, they didn't give up. That's what we have to practice. That even in the midst of all of this, we don't give up. I think another thing that comes from the story of Hanukkah that can be very, very important for us to remember is that the oil that seemed to be only enough to provide for one day ended up providing for 8. That we are connected to an infinite supply. We're connected to an infinite supply. We are connected to an infinite supply. We are connected to an infinite supply. Did you get that? We're connected to an infinite supply. One more time, Matthew. We're connected to an infinite supply. And whatever it is that we seek, it's already done in the mind of God. And while we're out there putting a whole lot of effort and trying to make it happen, and make it happen, and make it happen, and make it happen, our task is to make it well. Our task is to already see it, and see it in such a way that we already know that it is done. When we know that it is done, then it begins to unfold. It begins to happen. And people might say that it was something that was miraculous. And I really like to think that a miracle is just simply something that people don't really completely understand. And they don't really completely know that, we have this understanding of how principle and how spirit and how the universe works. And so while for many people it might seem miraculous, for many other people it's just a part of the expectation. Well, I already know what's going to happen. I already know it's going to work out. I might not have known completely how, but I had faith that it was. I might not have been able to give you all the details, but I was already at the finish line waiting for it to happen. And so the thing of it is that all of our resources of what we need is already available to us. One of my favorite Joel Goldsmith book is, people like The Art of Meditation, The Infinite Way and all. Mine is Our Spiritual Resources. And in that, he talks about the fact that when we take the approach that each day, when we wake up, before we do anything else, he likes to talk about if we would just hold for a minute and get the understanding and the feeling that, as he likes to say, that God is already on the field. Just that click, as he calls it, just that. I know God is already working in and through and as me, and that we have an infinite supply. An infinite supply. Now there's one more thing about Hanukkah that's really kind of interesting, the way that people practice it today. And that is the understanding that there is light that we use to read. We read things by light, we see things by light. Those of you that have never been out in the country, you know what it can be like when there is no light. It's dark. It's not city dark, country dark. to grandma's house. I don't know country garden. But there's light that helps in the midst of that to see. But one of the things people do in celebration of Hanukkah, particularly the mystical side of Judaism, the Kabbalists and everything like that, they understand that the light that is a part of the menorah and the light that is a part of Hanukkah is a different kind of light. They call it a spiritual light as opposed to a physical light. So it's not so much that they look to the light to be able to illuminate things around them as it is that they look to the light to remember that God is with them. And God is present, and God's presence. And one of the things that you'll discover with the menorah, as they light the menorah, and on day one, they light one candle, but that candle is never alone because there's another candle that's called, I believe, is the Shema, or Shema's candle, which is a companion that they use to light the other candles, but it stays lit. So that light that is shining is never shining by itself. It always has something that is present, shining with it. And for me, that's confirmation and good news that as I go through the things, and this woman said, you know, we never experience things, we all experience things. But the fact of that little light that's shining, that's bright, that helps me to understand that I'm not alone. And neither are you. You have the presence and the power of God in you. And I think sometimes we just kind of let that roll off of our tongues without really realizing what it means. We say it, you know, just like, you know, a lot of other things, and we just kind of let it roll off our tongues, but we don't really embrace what it means when we say that the full presence and power that creates worlds, that creates the universe, is present in us, not out there somewhere that we got to try to pull down like drops of reminders or beg it, you know, if I pray the right way, I'll get it and all of that. But when we recognize it's here now, it's already in us now, it's at work now, it's expressing itself now, which means that if I really learn what it means, and this is another thing we say, to let go and let God, to let go and let God. I think about all the time when I was a little boy and I had my throat was just raw, it was hurting. And my mother took me to the doctor. And I was running a fever at the same time. And the doctor looked at me and he told my mother, I'm going to have to take a throat culture. So he takes this, you know, and I'm probably about 7, 8 years old. To me, it was like a giant swallow. And he tells me to open my mouth. And the last thing I'm going to do at that point is to open my mouth and let this man stick this big old swab down my throat. And so I'm fighting him, I'm pushing him back and everything. And finally my mother got up in my ear. and told me what was going to happen to me if I didn't open my mouth. But the last thing she said to me in all of that is he's here to help. He's here to help. And I mean, I felt foolish, you know, because, you know, that swab was in there and out before I knew it. But what it taught me is that sometimes we struggle so hard when help is so easy. We struggle so hard when help is almost effortless. In fact, it is effortless. When the presence and power of God we allow to work, help is already there. We struggle, we make it hard, we try to do it ourselves. But the fact of it is, we're not here to do it by ourselves. In the light, every time from this point on, when I look at that menorah and the light from it, it's going to remind me that help is here, hope is here, light is here, God is here, Spirit is here, help is here, it all is here. And then I want to sing that song. God is real. God is magnificent. God is light. God is love.